Battleground, New York City, the fight for your vote. Your front row seat to the battle for New York's next mayor. It's the old guard clinging to power, chasing a candidate they never saw coming. Every night, our experts break it down.
What New Yorkers want above all else is authenticity.
He's been more visible in the Hamptons this summer than he has been on the streets of New York City.
We're listening to the people who matter most, you, the voters.
He is the shining star. He's working very hard. And I think he would work hard for the city, too.
And when the candidates sit across from us, nothing's off the table. What's your plan to make New York City feel like a safer city?
S.E. Cupp, that's your perception. Of course there's a lot of crime.
So what's happening right now? Let's dive in. Welcome to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. It is Wednesday, September 3rd. We have 62 days left until the all-important New York City mayoral race. And as we get closer to Election Day, the race is all anyone is talking about because there is news now coming out like a fire hose. We've got it all covered. I'm S.E. Cupp. Let's get right to it. Later in today's show, win or lose, we'll talk about the one thing Democrats can learn from Zohran Mamdani, how to reach young voters. But first, as always, let's get to the latest news from the campaign trail. Joining me now is Craig McCarthy, City Hall Bureau Chief for the New York Post. Craig, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, it's a big news day. There's lots of news, and everyone said this was going to happen. Everyone was right that this race changes after Labor Day. And boy, do we have news. First, I know all of you over at the New York Post were hustling to help break the news that Eric Adams, the Democrat incumbent running as an independent, is in talks with the White House over a potential job inside the administration. What is happening? Tell us everything you know.
Yeah, so, the Adams administration, as surrogates for Eric Adams and top White House officials, have started talking about a potential landing spot for Eric Adams. This has been going on for a bit now, but it really started to intensify as people are trying to thin the field here. They really are looking to stave off Mamdani mayoralship. So, to the top levels of the White House, not sure if it's gotten to the president's desk as of yet, but, listen, they're trying to get something for him to save face. He's trying, whether that's even to get him out of the race at this point, we're not sure. I mean, just so people understand, like at this point, everybody will appear on the ballot unless they move out of the state, unless they die, or unless they get appointed to be a judge. So no matter what, if somebody says tomorrow, I'm not running, they're still going to be on the ballot. So it would siphon votes away regardless. So the basis here and the kind of the thinking behind this is how do we get, say, Curtis Sliwa and how do we get, say, an Eric Adams out of this race? And the hypotheticals have been floated of offering jobs which would have them move out of the state.
Okay, let's chew on this for a second. It's like a Game of Thrones episode. The president of the United States, a Republican, is trying to help a Democrat whom he dislikes very much, Andrew Cuomo, defeat another Democrat, Zohran Mamdani, by giving another Democrat, Eric Adams, a job in his administration. Did I say all of that correctly?
Yes, you said all that correctly. And noting that, obviously, as we know, the president is a lifelong New Yorker. And, he came up with Democratic politics. He knows a lot of these players. He knows Andrew Cuomo.
Of course.
He got to know Eric Adams, I guess, recently. And he does personally like him from what I've been told from people around it. And I think it's, I think like we also have to take, people I talked to today, this isn't all politics. This isn't all, hey, I just want to make sure Cuomo wins. It's a lot of personal things as well that Eric Adams is liked by Trump and Trump doesn't want to see him fall flat. He wants to see him have something from what I've been told. And also, I don't think it's as much that Trump maybe likes Andrew Cuomo or wants him to be the candidate. I think it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they don't want a socialist mayor.
Okay, I get that. That would be the checkers version, but the chess version is that Trump wants Mamdani to win. Republicans want a Mamdani to be the face of the Democratic Party. So why would you give an advantage? Why would you try to do these shenanigans that would give Cuomo an advantage? Because we do have polling that shows Cuomo would beat Mamdani in a head-to-head if Adams dropped out. So I'm trying to understand the layers to this because I'm pretty sure they secretly want Mamdani to win.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people. Again, we have to separate the people that are the Trump administration people, the people that are the politicos that are really crafting the message to make sure they retake the House and those kind of things, and also Trump, the person who is noting a lifelong New Yorker that just sees this to him as a personal affront and wants to also come in as some sort of savior. And I think the Mamdani coming in and him acting and using that as a foil, yes, that politically completely makes sense. But as we've known, the president does not always do the most politically savvy things. His personal feelings also get in the way. And I think that this is one of those examples that he is inputting himself here because he wants to flex his influence as well, but also prevent having Mamdani taking over. And there's people in his ear telling him to do it.
This is so fascinating. Okay, we have a statement from the Eric Adams campaign. We will say this could change, but this is the latest statement we have, and it says, Mayor Adams has made it clear he will not respond to every rumor that comes up. He will remain focused, not be distracted, and grind for New Yorkers. He has had no discussions with, nor has he met with, President Donald Trump regarding the mayoral race. The mayor is fully committed to winning this election, with millions of New Yorkers preparing to cast their votes. His record is clear. Crime is down, jobs are up, and he has consistently stood up for working families. Mayor Adams is focused on building on that progress and earning 4 more years to continue delivering for the people of New York. That's from Todd Shapiro, spokesperson for his campaign. What's your response to that?
Well, I think since we've gotten this response, Politico has broken another tidbit of this story that he was offered a position in HUD. Now, we have not independently confirmed that. I'm not saying that it's not wrong. There's the rumor mill is going extremely strong in DC, and what Adams insiders will also always point to is that Andrew Cuomo is still very influential in a lot of these circles, and this is the backroom politics and backstabbing that Andrew Cuomo is known for, of starting these rumors and furthering these. And again, we don't have anything this is just the opining of trying to figure out where this is all coming from, but it's also based in some truth here. We all know that he is looking for a parachute here because everybody sees the polling. Eric Adams is a very good politician. He's a very good campaigner. The path forward, what they saw 2 months ago is basically non-existent at this point.
Mm-hmm. No, it only exists. Yeah, right. There's so many working parts here. It's really even hard to keep up with this. Is this like this is the curveball everyone was talking about? Maybe, the wrench that was maybe coming in this election that seemed like, just an inevitable conclusion?
This was one of the multiple things that, listen, they've already tried with Jim Walden to get him out. Obviously, that's just a few percentage points, but if it's, if it gets down to a few people, it could be close. And then, the Curtis Sliwa. I mean, they've been trying to get Curtis Sliwa out of this race for, since March. I mean, they were trying to get Eric Adams on the GOP line to get Curtis Sliwa out. It's called the Wilson Pagula, that you can basically nominate somebody to run in your party line and not switch parties to become a Republican. You could stay a Democrat because the line becomes vacant. I mean, we've really tested almost every level of, political history in New York City during this race. And it's definitely, I still don't think it's going to be the last thing that happens that's going to make headlines of that will shock all of us.
It's not going to be the last thing that happens today, right? I mean, okay, as you just mentioned, the other news, independent candidate Jim Walden, whom we've had on, announced he's suspending his campaign. He's encouraging other low-polling candidates to do the same. Does him dropping out, does that significantly change anything?
No, I mean, listen, he was polling at 1%. I mean, come the election, I think that would likely be even lower. I think if we're talking about a Cuomo and Mamdani head-to-head, that could play into factor here. Or, listen, if it becomes a 3-way race, you have Mamdani who, has really not gained any ground, which is kind of incredible for the Democratic nominee. He's kind of stalled. Same thing with Cuomo. I mean, they both have high negatives. You have Curtis that I'd argue that is underrepresented in the polls at this point. So you can come out with a 30-30-30, and then what's that other 10? I mean, that's not outside the realm of possibility.
Amazing. All right, let's move on to some other news with Storm Mamdani. He was endorsed this week by former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, whom we've also had on. Is that an important endorsement?
I mean, I guess when it happened, I was kind of a little bit taken aback. I thought he already kind of endorsed him. He's been out there
Uh-huh.
very publicly, talking down against all the other candidates. Obviously, we all know his long-standing feud with Andrew Cuomo.
Yes.
I know we've reported yesterday, he is close with Eric Adams. He reached out personally to Eric Adams to tell him that, he was going to do this and kind of give him the heads up. And,
Mm.
he's what I was told. He said he would have been with Eric if he was polling better, which I do believe because
Yeah.
Blasio was out there. I mean, he endorsed him in 2021, but he's also, come around and Adams has pushed his agenda forward. I don't know how much that it actually helps somebody like Mamdani at this point. I think he's kind of already had most of that vote locked down and would also then kind of shy away some of the centrists to maybe people that are kind of on the right that have kind of made the horseshoe in politics here and gone so far right they've ended up to the left and vice versa, and see somebody like de Blasio and think about the 8 years and kind of some of the jokes that have gone along with that, but also that he wasn't, that towards the end, I mean, the failed presidential bid. I mean, I think that associates with that as well. I'm not sure how much that good that does him.
I only have one more minute left, but I want to get you on this. Politico is reporting that Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is coming to town to campaign on behalf of New York City Republicans in coming weeks. Now, reading between the lines here, do you expect she's coming to campaign for Curtis Sliwa or against Zohran Mamdani?
It's likely going to be against Zohran Mamdani at this point. I mean, listen, Elise Stefanik's kind of angle here is just boosting her name, right, for her gubernatorial run next year.
Right.
I think a lot of this is more just kind of seizing that moment of everybody's pay attention. We're talking every night about this race, every hour about this race.
Yes.
And this is the way to get some spotlight, some eyeballs on this across the state, and especially if you're coming out as an anti-socialist, which they're going to try to peg Hochul with this, and they're going to try to peg the Democratic Party with this. So I imagine it's going to be more to that.
Interesting. Craig, thank you so much for being here again. There's a lot of news coming out now. It's really helpful to have great reporters like you on. So come back and join us soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Okay. Up next, I'll talk to one Democrat who has some advice for his party about this race and others. Battleground NYC will be right back. And we're back with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, where we are laser focused on this New York City mayoral election. And if the June primary showed us anything, it showed us the influence that frontrunner Zohran Mamdani has with young voters in a race where 40% of early voters were under the age of 40. But will he see the same support in the general election? And what can Democrats learn from his success with younger voters? Joining me now for the bigger picture is Kaivan Shroff, Democratic commentator and attorney. Kaivan, welcome to the show.
Great to join.
Okay. In your view, how did Zohran Mamdani do so well getting young voters to turn out in the primary?
I think he's gotten a little undersold for what he pulled off, because I think the national narrative really focused on his digital first campaigning, what they did with TikTok. And yet we've had some similar national examples that happened in a close proximity to that, like Deja Fox in Arizona, a TikTok influencer who obviously had mastered that form as well. I think what he did differently was he combined that with the on the ground organizing that actually wins elections, especially these local races. And I can give you just a recent example that comes to mind and maybe also reveals how off base, Eric Adams and Cuomo are, is that scavenger hunt that he arranged in the city. I think people my age, 31, especially after COVID, but also just in a different time for this country, feel very isolated. There's less community. There's less ability to meet people, even in a city like New York City. And putting something like that on, where you have people coming out across the city for something fun and joyful, Cuomo and Adams' campaigns were mocking that. I think, if anything, they should be learning from that, because you don't have to be a democratic socialist to do something like that. It's just a simple local thing. I think another takeaway of his win was he laser focused on affordability. I personally think that the DSA, Mamdani himself, are making a mistake to try to make this election a referendum on the National Democratic Party. But I also think there's a little bit of, maybe whether you want to say it's sexism or something else we can't explain. Kamala Harris focused on affordability. And I know some people disagree with that, but she had a plan on grocery prices, on childcare, on education, really any issue on prices and the economy. And I think even the Biden-Harris administration really targeted that and focused on it, people taking advantage of consumers, all of that. So I think some of the reality is you just need a candidate that resonates, and maybe you can't, boil that down to one or two factors, or maybe some voices get heard more and listened more than others, especially among the left of the party.
Well, yeah, and that's a really interesting point because you'll also remember that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris insisted for a long time that the economy was great. And they, rattled off a lot of stats and figures that might have been true. And they talked about things like lagging indicators that just didn't,
that doesn't resonate.
That didn't connect. Yeah, surprise. That was not a consolation for folks who hadn't gotten a raise in 5 years or, had to ration their gas money. So it's not just talking about the issue and identifying the issue. It's feeling Americans where they're at. And I think that is Zohran Mamdani's gift, because as we've unpacked this race, he has said things that could be a real turnoff to a lot of people. But the way he's talking about affordability is really connecting with people. And I think you're absolutely right. And we've made this point, too, that it's not just social media. The ground game that he is working is really old school, but it's also really impressive. Let's talk about another a part of this, and that's endorsements. He's gotten a bunch of endorsements, but not from key Democratic leadership in New York. You say he doesn't need them. I tend to agree, but what message would it send to the Democratic Party if he wins this election without the backing of the governor, New York's 2 senators, and the House minority leader who happens to represent a district Mamdani would oversee as mayor?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that Democrats are tripping over themselves about this endorsement game, because I think the answer is pretty consistent with this line, which I think is valid, that we're a Big Tent party and that local elections should be won locally, and that, what works in Astoria is not going to work for, senators and Congress people across the country. And it's really interesting to see. Obviously, you name those New York folks, and a lot of them are in leadership for the party. I do, news shows all the time, and they're like, oh, isn't the party going too far left? It's like, actually, no, because as you just rattled off, none of those folks have gotten behind him. And then it seems like he also can't win, because with his own constituency, and I think, this is something my friends and I were talking about right away when he won, it feels like nothing is ever good enough for the purity politics left. So immediately when he won and he becomes the nominee, and he has to do the hard work of building a coalition, which I would say, the DSA and those folks aren't usually in that winning position. So they don't have that practice of actually expanding on what they've, pitched, other than their most extreme supporters. He sort of came around, reworded on whether he would condemn the phrase globalize the intifada. So many TikToks from leftists I saw bashing him on that, saying, oh, he's already a sellout. Then he gave an interview, saying he doesn't totally subscribe to the national DSA platform. Again, the same thing and the same thing. So I actually think he's in a difficult position, because he's doing the responsible, smart thing of trying to moderate, win the general election, and yet his own supporters are kind of standing in his way.
It's really, his race is really fascinating for all the factors and influences that are coming at him. I've got a lot more questions for you, so stay right there. Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. We'll be right back. And we're back one more time with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. We're with Kaivan Shroff, Democratic commentator and attorney. Kaivan, we're talking about endorsements before the break. Tom Suozzi, a congressman, a Democrat congressman in New York City, said the thing out loud. He said people like AOC and Zohran Mamdani, socialists, should leave the Democratic Party. They're bad for the party. He said, I don't want them in the party. If Democrats in blue cities are sounding the alarm about far left progressives, should the party listen to that?
Right. I mean, I think it's an important question, because there's so much conversation around, why haven't folks fallen behind him? Maybe read into that. And I think the left is so inclined, and I think honestly Bernie Sanders did a lot of damage in this regard, to dismiss anything and everything they don't like as corporate shilling or people are bought and
Right.
for. These local elected officials have every incentive to get reelected. And you and I both know it's not just about appeasing AIPAC or something ridiculous like that. They should take note and they should listen. And, I think it's also a good strategy, I think, for somebody like Swazi to do that. That's sort of his lane. But I'd even argue that Texas has given Kathy Hochul a gift because she gets to look like a fighter on redistricting. She gets to be, they're clipping her up and putting like a great cut of her on TikTok by the Dem and all this stuff. You couldn't imagine it a couple months ago, but she's been able to laser focus on this issue. So she kind of, I think, has a free pass to not really get behind Mamdani in a way that without something else more interesting or more current, maybe she would have had to think about, the division there. But I think, moderates and leftists are as excited enough to make sure that we, fight for those seats. So that's an interesting dynamic.
Let's broaden out a little bit. I worked on the Republican autopsy in 2012, and it was painful, but it was an important exercise for the party to re-examine our candidates, our messaging, and our policies. You're in more rooms with Democrats than I am, I'm sure. Are they having those tough conversations about their agenda? Because most of what I hear, and I talk to a lot of Democrats too, is they're just still hoping that Trump will hang himself.
One of the things that Democrats talk incessantly about, and especially, this week with, I don't know if you're following that Wired chorus drama of these like paid influencers and all of that, is that the debrief, I don't think, has happened to the extent that it needs to happen. And I'll give you just one example that like sears in my brain every time I hear it, which is we saw Ken Martin, giving a talk. They had their DNC session for the summer. And he says this line that we heard immediately after the 2016 election as well, that you don't bring a spoon to a knife fight. We have to stop doing that. And I just want people to pause because there's something sort of off about that, right? Which is that we all know the idiom is you don't bring a gun to a knife fight, right? And I worked for Everytown. I understand, the importance of language and all of this, but like even that being the reset is like you are sort of washing this phrase that you're using because it's an idiom that resonates, and you're taking out the actual phrase because you don't want to use problematic language, right? Like it kind of like really epitomizes what Democrats are missing here. And it's like, it's a little bit brutal to watch. And especially it's tough to be the guy on TV defending that,
Sure.
But I think Democrats are so risk averse. I have a piece coming out in Zateo, Mehdi Hassan's outlet this week about, I went to Berghain in Berlin. It's sort of this club notorious for their door.
Did you get in?
Yeah. And I got in. And like, so this is going to sound super obnoxious, but basically my point is like, there's that bouncer at the door and they are deciding who's edgy, who's like creating culture, who's going to like be a fit for that environment. And then when you get in, there's sort of something magical that does happen there. It's not everyone that signs up and says, I want to be a Democratic influencer and I want to parrot the DNC talking points and like I fit your dress code that should be doing that, because influencers should be shaping culture. They shouldn't be like parroting talking points. And I think the Democrats have very much done the tack of like, oh, like we need to have social media. We need to have young people. Like, let me get this random guy that's going to read off like a bunch of our points that we send them and organize them to put out. And I just think, it can go viral. It can resonate at that level with people that are already Democrats who already want this to be something Democrats are good at, but it's not persuading anyone. It's much more cheerleading. Right. I think that's a huge miss on the approach.
I only have a little bit of time left, but I want to ask you, what are the motivating issues you think would bring voters back to the Democratic Party?
I think that they should focus on abolishing the Electoral College, and I have more to say about that. But I think that's, for example, a really populist issue that just because it's not feasible, it's worth having a conversation about, especially because Democrats are very unfairly disadvantaged in that regard. So I think it's fair to put on the table. I think, a more specific example that maybe is actually feasible and in the conversation right now is who's going to own the digital future. Already, we've had so many waves of, innovation in that space where the rich get richer, poor lose their jobs and all of that. And I think, Ro Khanna went viral in that moment when he did speak to Theo Vaughn and say, I want you to understand Republicans are for this and I'm fighting for this, which is that I don't want states to be able to ban regulations that say you need a truck driver in that truck. And
Yeah.
that's a really important moment that pierces through. So I think more of that, new ideas, less talking about Trump.
Kaivan Shroff, thanks so much for joining us.
My
and thank
pleasure.
you for being with us. We'll be back with you Monday through Friday as this race continues. Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote.